Welcome to Sports Insider. I'm Bud Shaw. I'm your host today. Dan Lobby is out. Chris Fedor is in Chicago, where the Cavs play the Bulls tonight in Game 6. We have a star-studded lineup for you today. In fact, if we had had them here in person, it would have required a red carpet. To avoid the paparazzi, we decided to just have them on the phone. We're joined right now by Chris Haynes in Chicago. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing fine. When I get back in town next week, I'll definitely be looking for that red carpet next time I come on.
I had a little trouble hearing you there, Chris, but hey, give us an idea if you can. I think we know what the mood is from the Cleveland side of this series, but what is the theme that's, you know, the recurring theme of what the Bulls have to do in this game to avoid elimination?
Well, just going through offensive lulls. I want to make sure you can hear me okay now.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. They go through too many offensive lulls, man. Like, Tom Thibodeau, as great as a head coach that he is in this league, he's one of the top 5 coaches in the league. His offense always leaves something left to be desired, man. His system, I was talking to some players off the record, and, you know, one thing they always criticize and complain about is the fact that they don't get to play freely. They don't get out the go. The offense is always structured. It's like every time down, kids wants a play to be called, wants something to be ran. A lot of times that's a way of stagnating your offense and not allowing some of your playmakers and Derrick Rose and Jimmy Butler to get out and be themselves to play. So, you know, they have to play at a consistent level on their offensive end and get out in transition in order to stay with the Cavs. Because if they allow the Cavs to continue to get set in their defense, it's hard to score in a defense that's set. And so they have to get out in the open. If kids allow them to do so, they'll have a pretty good chance to win the game.
You know, we heard similar things here, Chris, when Mike Brown was the head coach. Players complained about some of that also. Do you think the Bulls have the personnel right now to do that?
Yeah, no, they do. I mean, any team, you know, you don't have to have the best players. If you have some athletes, you know, they got some nice wing athletes like Tony Snell, Jimmy Butler, even generally to a certain extent, not as much now, but those guys can get out and run. And you always prefer to get easy baskets in transition when the defense is not set, and that way that frees things up. And then you start seeing the ball go in more, and then that gets your confidence up. So then when you do get in those half-court steps, you got a little bit more spunk to you. And it's just everything the Bulls do, they do it just so hard. On the offensive end, when they're milking the clock and running through their sets, it's just so hard. And then when it's 3-4 seconds left, somebody has to force up a shot. And that's not a great shot, especially when you ran 20 seconds off the shot clock. So they just have to get some easy looks, get some easy baskets, and I think they'll be in much better shape.
You know, Gasol returning to the lineup tonight, which I believe is going to happen, doesn't solve, obviously, what they do in transition, but it certainly is going to give them another option in a half-court offense. Has there been any blowback aimed at him for not playing over these last 2 games?
Besides me, you know, one thing I wrote, everybody probably know by now, but I wrote, talked about how, you know, I felt like they needed him that game. You know, that was a pivotal game for him to be out. And I know hamstring issues aren't anything to play with and mess around, but, you know, being when I was on the West Coast covering the Blazers last 4 or 5 years, that was his reputation in L.A., being a player that doesn't play through injury. He almost has to feel like he's close to 100% to get out there and go. And that's not to necessarily say that this injury that he's dealing with right now isn't something that's extremely serious. We've seen with Tony Allen, he had to sit, and we know he's a warrior, but just based off of his track record and based off of the things that I've known and talked to before in the past years of dealing with him, that's what kind of led me to write what I wrote. And I know I caught a lot of flack from it, you know, from, you know, Chicago fans, of course, and, you know, some Chicago media guys as well. But I'm sticking with that. And, yes, there are a couple players that thought he was going to play last game. And he went out there and shoot around, you know, the day of the game and try to give it a go, and he looked okay. Of course he's not 100%, but who is 100% at this point? They're going to miss his shooting from the front line position. He's not going to bang right now. He's not in a condition to bang and get points inside. But that's how the Chicago Bulls won that game in Cleveland. the pick and pop of Derrick Rose. And you can do that with a semi-bad habit. Get out there, pick and pop, and shoot some jumpers. So they're expecting to play. Hopefully he does, because they definitely need whatever he can get.
You know, LeBron always seems to be a step ahead of whatever his opposition thinks he's going to do in a game. What do you expect to see from him after the way he came out in Game 5?
I expect him to come out similarly. I really do. He wants to get this game out. They need the rest. That Washington-Atlanta game, I think that's going 7. Those are 2 evenly matched teams over there. So if they can close this game out, give Kyrie some rest with his elbow, LeBron James, he's still, even though he played like a monster, you couldn't tell, he's still dealing with a left ankle sprain. Right, it may be the right ankle sprain. I can't remember exactly, but this morning he had it wrapped. He had it wrapped, in his tennis shoes. So it's something that he's still dealing with. So he needs the rest. But he's going to go all out, man. He wants to leave it off the floor. And I spoke with Kendrick Perkins. He said these games are always the toughest games to close out. You can't rely on the insurance of just having Game 7 at home. He said those Game 7s can go to anybody. Nobody will be favored. So they'd much rather get the game here. So I expect LeBron to come out like he did in Game 5.
How about Kyrie Irving, Chris? Did what we saw in Game 5, is that sort of the new baseline for him? Are you expecting to see incremental improvements or big improvements as the playoffs continue and he gets more rest?
No, I don't think so. At least that's not what I'm expecting. He told me this morning that the injuries that he's going through, he's not going to be fully healed until the season when he has to just shut it down. So I expect him to have his good days. I expect him to have his bad days. And I said this, and what I'm saying now is similar to what I said about Kevin Love all year. People kept asking me, December, and January, February, and March, is Kevin Love finally going to get it? Is everything going to click? I said, no, I don't think so. I think some games he's going to be there, some games he's not. He hasn't fully grasped it. And with Kyrie, any wrong step, if somebody steps on his foot, somebody bangs his knee, something can happen that can just set him back, one step behind. And that's why I say that with these games coming every other day in this series, I just think this is something he's just going to battle with. Some days he may give you 25, some days he may give you 12.
All right, we got 2 big picture questions for you. One is what you mentioned with the Atlanta-Washington series. If the Cavs get through Chicago, you would think in this town, after 51 years without a title, that people wouldn't get too far ahead of themselves. Yet I hear it all the time now over the course of this series that neither of these teams can play with the Cavs right now. Do you believe that?
I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I would say the Cavs would be favored over either one of those teams. I still think I would think Washington will give them the best battle. I really do, even though I think Atlanta's the better team. And I think personnel-wise, we talk about Paul Pierce, a dagger type of player who hits big shots. He knows he can't stop LeBron, but he has experience with LeBron. And he knows how to get into players' mindset. You got John Wall, a speedy guard, similar to Derrick Rose, somebody who Kyrie's going to have problems with his elbows. I think that Washington will give them the best battle, but I think Atlanta is a better team. But I just think Atlanta doesn't match up with Cleveland. So, yes, they will be favored, but I think either way it goes, whether it's Atlanta or Washington, I think it goes 6 or 7 games.
Okay, and the last question we have for you, you can debunk this theory I've heard that the losing coach in this Chicago Cavaliers series will be out of a job.
I will say it's a 90% chance on Chicago's side, and I will go 70%. No, that's too high.
I was going to say.
Let's go 40% Cleveland side, because it all depends on how it ends. Like if it ended with that timeout, Black got a timeout call in Game 4, and the series is over. I think it's 90% chance he's out. Because you can't lose the series based on your coach not being aware how many timeouts you had. So as of right now, if they were to lose in 7 games right here, I think it's a 40% chance right as well.
All right, great stuff. Hey, Chris, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later.
All right, take care, my guy.
All right, that was Chris Haynes. You heard his thoughts on it. I would give that about a 30% chance. I think if they get past this series, certainly, and if they get through the conference finals like we all expect them to, maybe that's wrong to expect them. But I think then at that point, Game 4 becomes kind of a forgotten blip. If they don't get out of this series, it becomes one of the more infamous moments in Cleveland sports history. All right, we're going to go to Mary Kay Cabot now. Mary Kay, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, you're stuck with me. It's Bud today. Everybody else abandoning me, so you'll have to stay on the line for about the next 20 minutes to get me through the show.
I'm more than willing.
All right, how's your 2016 mock draft coming?
Oh my goodness, they're out there. They are out there already.
Yeah, they're not only out there. I noticed that in one they have the Cavs picking third and taking Cardale Jones. It kind of gives you an idea of what they think about the 2015 draft and the state of the union of the team when you see something like that.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? Jimmy hasn't got that all that rolling when we caught him talking to Cardale with a look of love in his eyes at the Greater Cleveland Sports Awards. So yes, that speculation will be rampant, I'm sure, for the next year.
Catch us up, if you would, Mary Kay, on what's going on at this point in the offseason with this team and what the next step is when they all get together again.
Well, the first thing is we see them tomorrow. The Browns have their Cleveland Browns Foundation golf outing. So we will hear tomorrow from Mike Pettin, Ray Farmer, and then some players. Now, I don't anticipate that Johnny Manziel will be there, but they will make some players available tomorrow morning. So we'll have a little bit of news for you then. And then the next thing after that is they are in off-season workouts that roll right into the OTAs, organized team activities, which I always want to say, how do we know they're organized? We're not in there. Maybe they're disorganized. But anyways, they have those coming up, and we will be out there once a week for those. Now, Danny Shelton went back to school, and he is going to graduate on June 14th, so he's going to miss a few of these workouts, but he'll be back for the mandatory minicamp in June. But for the most part, these guys are doing on-field work 3 days a week. There's a lot of install going in there with John DeFilippo, and they're in football mode. And I will say that Tayshaun Gibson still is not there, and I do think that's somewhat of a concern because it's just not a good sign when one of your best safeties is not in these OTAs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mary Kay, at this time last year, there was so much known about Kyle Shanahan just because of the name and the kind of offense that he's been associated with in his jobs as a coordinator. What do we really know about DeFilippo at this point, about what they really want to do, other than that we suspect they want to run the ball? I mean, so did those guys last year. So what do we know about him and his passing game and what his principles are?
Well, we do know, I think that John DeFilippo is going to bring a lot of different influences to the table and try to put his own stamp on an offense. So what we've seen him be involved with before, I think he's going to take a piece of this and a part of that and put it all together. And I think there are probably going to be a few growing pains in the beginning while he tries to figure out who he is as a coordinator. Now, he's got a lot of West Coast influence in his background. He also, spent time with the Jets. And so we know that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the running game. And, he worked with Pettin before, and he's worked with Rex Ryan. But then, you hear that he also wants to push the ball down the field. So, at this point, I don't know exactly, how they're going to do that. You look out there and you wonder, where the skill players are going to come from. I mean, they have some. I mean, they're going to have to count on Dwayne Bowe to really step up. They're going to have to count on Brian Hartline. And if Travis Benjamin is back, I think that speed on the field will really help them. But I think there will be a lot of influences. They're still going to keep the zone blocking scheme, which was implemented by Kyle Shanahan. But they like the way that worked out for them last year, and you'll see more of that this year.
So much of this is dictated by the abilities of the quarterback. Is there any reason not to think that they see McCown as a classic game manager type of guy, a Trent Dilfer type?
Yeah, I kind of think that is what they see. And what they like in him is the fact that he doesn't get rattled. He plays with a lot of poise. He's very smart and cerebral. And he will pretty much, again, manage the game. We keep hearing them say this over and over again. we will support him with a running game in a way that he's never quite been supported before. John DeFilippo knows him well. They were together in 2007. He knows his capabilities and his limitations. And I've talked to a couple of coordinators in the league that have said, oh, you know what, that is not a bad choice at all for somebody to come in here and be a first quarterback. He has respect around the league.
We get into training camp. We know to expect that McCown is going to be the starter going into that. We suspect he'll be the starter going into the regular season. But just to play a hypothetical game for a minute, if he doesn't show very well early in camp and Meisel does, we know what the fan base is going to be saying, or at least part of it. Are the coaches going to be committed to starting Josh McCown no matter what, do you think, this summer?
I do think that they are committed to it. But, of course, you do have to see how it plays out. And nobody really knows yet exactly what Johnny is going to bring to the table. If he is working as hard as everyone says he is, and he is learning the offense, and you couple that with some of his physical abilities and his ability to run around and be a little bit mobile, and people talk about that his arm strength is actually underrated. He's got a very good arm. If he clearly shows in camp and maybe in the preseason games that the lights are coming on, anything can still happen. I would never say never, but I do think that the strategy is a sound one right now, that they're taking any onus off him. They're taking any pressure off him at all right now, and they're also taking the spotlight off of him. If you play it this way right now, then you don't have the whole entire national media necessarily descending upon Cleveland to see if Johnny's going to win the training camp battle. Everybody, it kind of keeps everyone at bay a little bit. So I think it's brilliant. It gives Johnny the opportunity to come from behind and see if he can really surprise everyone. So I think it's a brilliant strategy by them. But I do think the plan is to start Josh McCown.
Okay, Mary Kay, one more thing and we'll let you go. You said you're going to be out at a golf outing tomorrow with access to these guys. Is there anything in particular you're looking to catch up with Pettin or Farmer about?
You know what? We just had them for the rookie camp, so there's not really a ton that we don't know at this point. I think we've covered pretty much everything. I think the outstanding issues are, things like Tayshaun, and also, of course, we would be thrilled to catch up with Johnny. I'm waiting to find out, when Johnny will be available, how they're going to roll him out to us, and what he's going to have to say when he does that. I'm not anticipating that happening tomorrow, but this is kind of the quiet time. You don't have to worry too much about rookie holdouts, even though Danny Shelton and Cam Irving aren't signed yet. They will sign. That's not a huge deal. The only other issue is Alex Mack, and will he opt out of his contract after this year? But he's going to try not to talk about that much. So if we see him tomorrow, I don't anticipate he'll really address it in any kind of depth.
All right, Mary Kay, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we'll catch up with you again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, bud.
Well, that was Mary Kay Cabot talking about her possibility of catching up with Farmer and Pettin tomorrow at a golf outing. Johnny Meisel, I assume, will be there, especially if he's moved to Redtail. He's going to want to show off his game. Thankfully, they don't have any of the sports writers playing in that thing because there are houses, I think, pretty close to the course where they're going to be playing. Next, we're going to go to Progressive Field. We've got Zack Meisel. Zack, are you there?
I'm here, bud. How are you?
Good. How are you? Quite a performance last night by Corey Kluber. I imagine the standard has been set for Trevor Bauer today, that he's going to try to go for 19 strikeouts.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor Bauer is the type of guy who wants to be the best, and he's never satisfied, and he's a perfectionist to a fault, maybe. And maybe the worst thing that could have happened for him is Corey Kluber goes out and does what he does about 12 hours before Bauer takes the mound.
Well, it's funny, back in the 90s when Lofton was here, we always watched, and it was always considered a very dangerous precedent if he actually did hit a home run, because then he tried to hit home runs the next 4 games he played. So hopefully Bauer won't fall into that trap. Zack, did you have any issue at all with Kluber coming out of that game last night?
No, I think maybe if it was a 6 or 7 run cushion, maybe you would have seen Kluber stay in there. I think the thing the Indians are worried about, and this was Terry Francona said, this is Brad Mills' decision, the bench coach, because Francona was watching from the weight room when all this was happening because he was ejected. But Kluber was at 113 pitches, and that's one thing to consider. His career high is 120. But the Indians only had a 2-run lead, and it's not like they were getting much from their offense after the first inning. So if Kluber does start to get into trouble, he's laboring a little bit, and all of a sudden he's at 125, 130 pitches, and maybe that lead dwindles to 2-1, or you're in a tie game, and then you finally go to Cody Allen, and now he's coming in with guys on base. It can be a messy situation. So I think the Indians just figured, let's let Cody Allen come in. It's a clean situation, base is empty, go to work. He came in and he said he noticed the Cardinals hitters were completely off balance based on what Kluber did to them the first 8 innings. So it made his job easy, and I think it was the safe move. I mean, I know people wanted to see history, and his pitch count wasn't outrageously high, but it made sense, and I can understand what the Indians' thinking was.
Well, do you think it's also a different decision if it's late July and it's still 85 degrees out? Do you think that they looked at the weather in this case at all?
It's possible. I mean, it was chilly last night, and maybe Kluber, especially when he got into a really nice groove late last year. So maybe if this was even September and he was really dealing and he was going 8 or 9 innings every single time he went out there. Maybe if he's in one of those grooves, you let him go out. But again, this is a guy who struggled his last few starts, so it's the same thing. It's let him leave at his peak, and he can feel good about the start instead of maybe you send him back out in the 9th and he gives up a couple runs, and then he's kind of kicking himself and wondering what went wrong as he heads into his next start.
Well, here's your chance to claim to be Nostradamus. Did you see a dominating Kluber performance coming at all before this start?
You know, I think there was a lot of panic about how he had fared in his previous few starts, and even, you know, everyone's saying he's 0-5 and his ERA is 5. What's wrong with him? And people, I got asked if last year was a fluke and all these questions, and it's early, and he wasn't that great through 6 or 7 starts last year either. So I don't know if anyone could have seen something like this, but Roberto Perez said that when he came out of the bullpen last night, Kluber's curveball was like the best he's ever seen it, and he knew he was going to have an amazing start. And so I think the Indians knew, and the Indians knew that he was going to turn it around, that he was close to figuring things out, and certainly it all came together on one night.
You know, they've gotten some production, looking at them offensively right now. They have obviously gotten production out of Kipnis since moving him to the leadoff spot. Brantley's still swinging the bat fairly well. Do you see any signs of this team coming out of this?
Yeah, it's the top of the order. Moving Kipnis to the leadoff spot and Santana to the number 2 spot has been great. And Kipnis his on-base percentage in the month of May is almost 600. He's carrying the cover off the ball. And Santana's been walking a lot. He's been pretty good. And it's finally giving Michael Brantley opportunities with guys on base. And he had an 11-game hitting streak snapped last night. But that top 3 is working well. They just need to figure out the rest of the lineup. That's the problem. They can get the top of the order on base, and they can move some guys around, and then it seems like it gets to that black hole of the 5, 6, 7 guys in the order, and then certainly the bottom of the order, if it's Roberto Perez and Jose Ramirez, has been just dreadful. So I think what's going to maybe turn this offense around is when you get Yan Gomes back and you can put a right-handed stick in the 5 or the 6 hole every single day, that's going to change some things, because you've got Brandon Moss and you've got David Murphy and you've got Nick Swisher. I mean, these aren't guys who should be hitting 4th and relied on to produce all of your runs. So it lengthens out that lineup. It gives the Indians another right-handed bat, and I think if Kipnis and Santana and Brantley, you hope they can stay hot for when Gomes does come back, and then maybe the Indians can consistently score some runs.
That's a good point. What's the update on Gomes? When could people expect to see him again?
Well, he's going to go to Lake County this weekend, and he's going to DH one day. He's going to catch another day. It's possible. I mean, he's going to need at least a week on a minor league rehab assignment, but you could see him by next weekend or the following week. I mean, that would put him at about really the front part of that 6 to 8 week projection, which the Indians would be thrilled with. I think a lot of people thought when they saw the play live, Gomes could be lost maybe as long as the season. So he could be back in a week or two, and I think the Indians would be thrilled with that, and it would it would help the pitchers out as well.
Okay, one last thing. You know, every one of these shows has to have an obligatory Francisco Lindor question. So are you pro bringing Lindor up, or do you understand the organization's stance on that?
Well, I think I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I think my opinion is there is no ideal situation. That's the problem here. I think Jose Ramirez should be in AAA, but I think Francisco Lindor probably should be in AAA too. I don't know that he's ready. And talking to Chris Antonetti and talking to some people who have seen him play, I think he does. I mean, look, Chris Antonetti said a couple of weeks ago he has a litany of things to work on, and we pressed him and asked, what are those things? And he kind of dodged the question. But in talking to more people and really getting a sense of how he's fared at AAA, it does seem like he's not a finished product by any means. I mean, he does have a lot to work on. And I understand the argument that, well, he can't be worse than Jose Ramirez has been through the first 6 weeks of the season. That's fair. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Indians ride Mike Aviles a little bit when he eventually returns to the club and maybe send down Ramirez and not call up Lindor. That wouldn't surprise me. So I think there really isn't an ideal situation. This is not just one way or the other. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area here, and it's disappointing because the Indians could really use a boost, and I'm not sure Lindor's ready.
All right, Zach, thanks a lot. We appreciate your time, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Sounds good, bud. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, speaking of the Indians, as we sometimes do these days when the Browns don't have anything going on, you know, Corey Kluber had a historic Wednesday night, striking out 18 St. Louis Cardinals batters. And it was the most strikeouts by an American League pitcher since Roger Clemens in the late 90s. I think it tied a club record set by Bob Feller in 1938, which was, believe it or not, even before my time. In 5 years' time, Kluber's record night will have taken place in front of 35,000 Indians fans. At least that's how many will claim they were in attendance. For the record, the attendance was 12,313. I don't want to say that even those numbers seem padded, but I believe it was 12,314 until Terry Francona was ejected. Our first comment, believe it or not, is a sarcastic one and says, hey, 13,000 for the Cards? Way to support the team, fans. That comes from Lakewood Diner, who I believe is also known as Chris Perez. A debate followed Kluber's performance because acting manager Brad Mills lifted the right-hander and sent in closer Cody Allen in the ninth inning. Some Indians fans, especially those who believe pitch counts are baseball's hocus pocus, thought Kluber should have finished the game and gone after the strikeout record. Well, that would be 20, meaning he'd have to strike out the side to beat it. Our second commenter points out that temperatures were in the 40s, as I mentioned to Zack, and that Kluber is a fairly important piece in the Indians' future, and that he'd already thrown 113 pitches, and that his chances of getting the record weren't particularly good. To which I say, hey, if you're going to keep making that much sense in one single comment, there's no room for you here in spin-offs. We don't harbor people who come in here with logic and common sense. There's simply no place for the likes of you in any consistent basis on this show. You know, the Indians had the town to themselves Wednesday, not so Tuesday night when the Cavs beat the Bulls in Game 5, a game that featured an altercation between Crocodile Della Vedova and Taj Gibson. When the punishment was announced Wednesday, Della Vedova getting a technical foul that will cost him some money, while Gibson won't be suspended, it did not take long for the conspiracy theories to blossom. Soccer Soul says the league continues to show that it caters to the big market teams at the expense of poor little old Cleveland. He says the NBA continues to hope that the Cavs are put out of the playoffs due to injuries. Well, listen, I'm no marketing genius, but I do think I know a little something about what makes a good story after all these years. The best player in the game returning to his hometown team after jilting an entire region, the best player in the world with a chance to deliver the city's first championship since 1964, that's a pretty good story. LeBron James and the Cavs are the redemption story to end all redemption stories. And even if they weren't, the Bulls swallowed most of a 17-point deficit without Taj Gibson in Game 5. Losing him in Game 6 wouldn't exactly be like Michael Jordan taking a year off to show how hard it is to hit a curveball. Finally, all it took to put the Browns on the back burner in this town was a legendary LeBron James performance in Game 5 and a historic night from Corey Kluber. Cavs mania actually reduced Joe Thomas to the role of cheerleader the other night. He showed up at the Q for Game 5 and led the arena in a rousing show of support for the Cavs. I could be wrong, but I believe that's him on the left. No? Well, our next comment and our final comment of the day comes from Sergio, who says, "I'm so happy Joe Thomas got his first taste of the playoffs in a Cleveland jersey." You know what they say, things happen in threes. So that means the Browns and the Indians can be expected to soon join the Cavaliers as playoff teams with legitimate shots to win world championships sometime in the next 50 years. Well, listen, I want to thank you for being here. Next week you'll get Dan and Chris back, I'm sure, and be happier for it. I'm Bud Shaw. This has been Sports Insider.